Grace, mercy, and peace to you, Internet, and welcome to Lutheran in a Strange Land. My name is Matthew E. Cochran. I'm a contributor at The Federalist. I blog at the 96th Thesis, and our goal on this channel is to learn which way the wind is blowing, to understand our culture, our philosophy, our theology, so that we don't get swept away by all the lies and deceit. And we are starting a new series this week called Understanding Transgenderism, obviously a topic of huge controversy in our culture today, one which a lot of people simply have trouble wrapping their heads around, and one in which a lot of people are truly vicious in the way that they approach the other side. And because of that, before we get started with understanding transgenderism, we need to talk a little bit about just understanding. In speaking about transgenderism, we're talking about something incredibly divisive, where each side of the issue tends to think of the other as either insane or evil. And then you have, of course, a big group in the middle who just want to be left alone. And, I mean, these are really big hurdles to understanding the other side. But if you really want to understand an issue, you have to understand both sides of it, even when you solidly identify with one side yourself. And that is why we are going to be going over 3 things you need to understand about understanding. First, to understand the other side, to really understand them, you can't just understand why they're wrong. You can't stop there. And for a whole lot of people, when a biological male says that he's really a woman, that makes about as much sense as a biological male saying that he's really a hard-boiled egg. Crazy in colloquial terms, perhaps some version of mentally ill if you want to try to be clinical about it. But nevertheless, that's kind of how it's seen. And at the same time, you also have a frightening number of people on the other side who will do everything within their power to destroy your life if you do not enthusiastically support the proposition that a man who thinks he's a woman is unquestionably correct in his assessment. And needless to say, that is not a good place to start a conversation, but we don't really have any choice in the matter. In the short term, we do not get to choose our social circumstances. And while this is a terrible place to start a conversation, it's an even worse place to end one. Because a lot of people believe things that you think are crazy. But crazy things generally don't seem crazy to the person who believes them. And if you want to understand that person, you can't just stop at understanding why they're wrong. You also have to understand why it seems plausible to them. Why would they embrace something that you think is crazy? Otherwise, it just ends up being a shouting match among individuals, bullying if you're in a small group, and certainly politics by other means on the social level, which is what we're seeing now. When social change is imposed by force rather than as a result of choice and understanding on the part of those involved. So, even if you don't agree with the other side, and as is going to become very apparent during the series, I'm very firmly on one side of this issue, you still need to put in the work of understanding the other side. Otherwise, you're never going to make much headway in convincing people of your position. You're never going to make much sense to them. And, that's something I picked up from Christian apologetics, rationally defending the truth of Christianity. Because when you tell Christians that, God, the creator of the universe, became a human being to die for his creation, right? That the one who created sleep had to be rocked to sleep by his mother because he was fussy. That the one who created blood had to shed his, and that somehow that shedding forgives us our sins. To Christians, yeah, those are amazing. Those are profound things to ponder. But you tell a non-Christian that, and yeah, you know how that sounds, right? Yeah, nuts. And tell an atheist that this past weekend you ate God's body and you drank His blood, and see how that goes. See how normal that sounds to them. And I'm saying we join together as brothers and sisters in Christ because we believe things that the rest of the world thinks are insane. And if you want to understand any issue, any divisive issue like that, you have to understand the appeal of the other side as well. Okay, especially when you think the other side is crazy. Second thing about understanding, you shouldn't look at understanding as something that you are owed. In other words, you can't force or coerce understanding out of somebody. Understanding is a two-way street. You have to try and be understandable. And that's something that the other side of this issue really doesn't get. And the reason this whole situation has become so nasty, if you're dealing with a bunch of people who think that you're crazy, well, you know how you're never going to be understood? By saying, oh, you're a bigot if you don't believe the crazy things I believe. Or at least what to them is crazy. I'm going to get you fired from your job if you use the word he in the same way that's been used for the past 700 years. Using social pressure to coerce people into confessing something that is, to them at least, essentially that 2 + 2 = 5. I mean, you can create fear that way, and fear will give you a certain measure of power, and we're certainly seeing that at work in our culture right now. But all you end up with out of that is a bunch of weak-minded people patronizing you at the cost of a whole lot of destroyed lives. There's no understanding there. There's no understanding to be gained from taking that path. And the more social justice warriors push that kind of fear, the less inclined people are going to be to put in that extra effort to understand somebody. And the third and final thing about understanding. And really, this is one of the most important points of this entire series. So if you get nothing else out of it, at least get this. There is a distinction between a person's experience and a person's interpretation of that experience. Which is to say, there's a difference between how you feel and what your feelings mean. Because when it comes down to when it comes to experience, well, you can't gainsay a person's feelings. It's their personal experience, not yours. You can't tell them how they feel because you aren't feeling what they're feeling. You can't tell them what they've experienced because it's not your experience, it's theirs. You can't correct them on that matter. You can empathize, you can sympathize, because maybe you've felt things that are similar to what they describe, but you cannot correct them on their subjective feelings and experiences. They are subjective. However, at the same time, people can take their feelings, their experiences, and interpret them in different ways. They can draw erroneous conclusions about their experiences, essentially to make objective conclusions based on subjective experiences. I feel this way, therefore the world is this way. And just as an easy example, there's a difference between saying, I am angry at you, and you are a horrible and nasty person. Okay, I mean, those two tend to go hand in hand, because when you're angry, that's what you tend to think about the other person. But one is the experience, the anger. But the other is an interpretation of your anger, and it may or may not be a good interpretation. Because there are a lot of reasons that you might be angry with another person, and a lot of the time, it's not because of something the other person did. Maybe it's because of a misunderstanding. Maybe it's because of something you did, and you don't really want to own up to it, so you blame it on them instead. That's incredibly common for human beings. And that's what the thing, you need to listen to people's experiences. But you don't have to automatically accept their interpretations of those experiences. And when you look at yourself rather than others, your experiences are what they are. But you yourself should think critically about your own experiences and what those experiences mean. To give another example, parents. Sometimes parents will disapprove of their child's romantic relationship that they're in. And sometimes parents who disapprove will tell their kids, you're not really in love with that other person. You think you're in love, you're not really in love with them. And, there's a problem with that. I mean, on one hand, who are the parents to tell their child, those two people, how they feel about each other? You don't know. You're on the outside looking in. You don't understand. You can't just gainsay their personal feelings, their subjective experiences. And you don't really know whether they feel romantically about each other or not. But, on the other hand, when children are interpreting their feelings of romance to mean that this is a good relationship, and that this is destined to be, and everything is going to work out, and everything's going to be just fine because we have these feelings for each other. And that anybody who thinks it's a bad idea, well, they just hate us, and we can just dismiss them because they don't understand our feelings. Well, that's just as wrong. Because who are the children to take their own personal subjective experience and try to turn that into an objective fact that extends well beyond that experience. I mean, John Lennon, he was atrociously wrong about a whole lot of things, but all you need is love is definitely one of those things he was very wrong about. And there are a lot of conflicts and misunderstandings that arise because people on both sides conflate the experience with the interpretation. And sometimes that ends up with people judging things that they have no business judging. And sometimes it ends up with people exempting themselves from judgment, from which they have absolutely no business exempting themselves. And usually it is a combination of both, because most people are not particularly clear thinkers, especially in emotionally charged situations, especially today when we have this follow your heart culture. So experience is what it is. You need to accept it. But interpretation of experience, that can be judged. You don't need to accept another person's interpretation if it doesn't make sense. And that difference can make a huge difference, even on a massive scale sometimes. I mean, think about Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. His experience, at least according to the stories, was that he was in a cave and he was hearing voices. And he struggled with how to interpret those. Is it some demon that's talking to me? Or am I going crazy? Or is it an angel delivering the words of God? Yeah, those are three very different interpretations. And Muhammad chose one of those. And that irrevocably changed the world in a terrible way down the line. So the interpretation, that makes a huge difference. And it is not the same thing as the experience. And that is where we are going to pause for now. But be sure to join us again next time. And when we are finally going to dive into the primary topic by taking a brief look at the history of gender.